What's up, guys? Welcome to another Rule of Two, where Mark is making interesting hand gestures. And today we've got a very special guest once again, Bill Kimberlin, who is the Industrial Light and Magic visual effects editor. He's done a lot of some of your favorite films, including mine: Return of the Jedi, Star Trek 3, Back to the Future, all of them, all three of those, Cocoon, The Mask, Schindler's List, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Jumanji, Gangs of New York, Saving Private Ryan, Sleepy Hollow, The Abyss, and many more. He collaborated a lot with George Lucas at Industrial Light and Magic at ILM. And today we're going to be talking about his book. We're going to be talking about his experiences. You can find his book in the link below on Amazon.com or Amazon.ca. It's available in all formats. How's it going, Bill?
It's going great. And you can also walk into any bookstore and say, can you order me this book? And they can order the book, Barnes & Noble, wherever you want to go, your local bookstore. But a lot of people go to Amazon, and that's fine.
And what's up, everybody? Mark here, and bring up the book one more time. So this book actually has a really interesting cover because this scene, which is the final battle over Endor in the Death Star, was the scene that they brought you into ILM to produce, right? Because George said, I want the craziest space battle ever made. And they brought you in as a film editor who had done your own film, directed, and I believe edited your own film called American Nitro. And your first focus was to do that crazy scene with tons of layers and spaceships, and that was your first challenge at ILM, correct?
So that photo that's on the front of my book is SB-19. SB-19 was the 19th shot in the Jedi space battle, and it is the most complicated shot that was ever done in the old photo optical process, where you had to put together the spaceships, the backgrounds, the star field, the planet, the whole Megillah. And I worked on that for, I don't know, about a month. And we had these VistaVision moviolas. So there were big, old, sort of thrashing machine sounding movie editing machines. And we were able to make black and white tests of all the ships. And I would compile them, do pre-composites, stack them all together, run them in different configurations, sometimes turn a ship that was intended for another shot, put it in this shot, or turn one upside down, whatever would work. And when I finally got it to a point where I thought, okay, I think this works, I showed it to my supervisor, Ken Ralston, who was in charge of all of the shooting of the ships. And of course, this was designed by George Lucas and Joe Johnston. They were the architects. I just had to put the thing together. So at a given point, they called George and said, one of our producers or production assistants called him. I'm in D building at ILM, which I'll talk about. And he's next door, his feature cutting room for Revenge of the Jedi. I know everybody wants to call it Return, but it's going to be Revenge for the rest of my days because I've got all the t-shirts and coffee cups and stuff.
Oh,
and
cool.
That's what they wanted to call it. And it wasn't a test name either. So the story goes, some little kid wrote him a letter and says, Jedis don't seek revenge or something. So he changed the title, if you want to believe that one. That's a good
I just got chills. That's all it was? I just got chills when you said that. Wow, that's a true story. Some kid, somebody.
That is the story. When we sat in the screening room and we were running, our projectors were set up to run shots over and over and over again. And at some point, you have to say, okay, that's good enough. So we had three types of shots: temp, CBB, and final. A CBB meant could be better, but we wouldn't be embarrassed to have it in the movie, and we send it to the director and we tell him, if there's time, we're going to go back and make this perfect. If we totally run out of time, that's going to be in your movie, whether it was George or Spielberg or anybody else. Well, but once in a while, especially my boss, Ken Ralston, would say, you know, I got this letter from this little kid in Japan, and he sees everything, and he points out any error that we might make. So let's do this one more time for him, because, you know, I don't want to get another letter from him telling me what's wrong with this shot. So getting back to George, he comes over. He says, can you run the shot for me? I run the shot for him. This is SB19. He says, great. Turns around and walks out. That was the highest compliment you could get. That's what George would say. Great. He said it, I don't know how many times. And the fellow, I eventually wound up running visual effects editorial at ILM. But my boss at the time said, geez, I thought we were going to be working on that shot for 2 months. But, you know, it just so happened, it came together. And so that's why I put it on the front of the book. And I could tell you stories on how many lawyers I had to talk to get the right to put that on the front of my book.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, when Disney took over, all of a sudden they changed the rules and said, nothing can come from Star Wars. Nothing can come from the films. And I said, but you don't understand. That was a photo composite that was made. It does not come from the film. And it was made as a promotional tool by our still department. And so technically it's not in the movie, and somehow they relented, and I got to use it.
Wow. Let me ask one quick question in theory you can get, because I know theory is you know, dying to get some questions in. One thing that I'm dying to know, because in everybody who's worked with George, I ask, what was it like? What are your like best memories, or describe what working with George Lucas was like back in those days? Was he a tough boss? Was he a supportive boss? Like, you know, there's always, you know, there's coaches that are tough on their pitchers, and then there's coaches that know when to support the pitcher. What kind of coach boss was George when you were working with him?
So when I started working with him, he was a very reticent man, and he was shy around people that he didn't know well. Once he got to know you, then you could kibitz with him, and he was like a big college kid. So he'd come to work, he's wearing jeans, he's wearing a flannel shirt. On the weekends, he would wear his USC film school Letterman jacket. And the thing about him was his ability to analyze and say, that's good enough, or, you know, we have to redo something, or, you know, you send it to me and I cut it in and it's not working with the sequence. So one time he comes, he's been away. We're on Jedi. He's been away for a couple of weeks. Well, we think we have shots done, but the shots are still hot on the sets because we want to tear all the sets down and remove the models and change the lighting until we get an okay. So he finally comes in one morning to the screening room, and the producers are kind of wringing their hands and they're feeling like they're behind. And George says, you want decisions? Bring the lights down. You'll get decisions. Lights come down. We start projecting stuff. Bing, bam, boom, in, out. You know, these are decisions that are flying around the room that, you know, millions of dollars are at stake here. Yeah. So he was not a screamer. He was not anyone who was yelling at anybody. He would say he liked something or he didn't like it. I never saw him raise his voice to anyone. My book's full of stories of other directors who, and it comes from the fact that they are unsure. They're unsure about whether something is good or not, and that shows that it's fear, actually. And I'm sure George has his foibles. One of my best friends, when I was working at ILM, he said that he'd walked out in the hallway, saw George, stuck out his hand and said, "Hi, George, I'm Tim. I've been working for you for 2 years and I've never met you." And he said George practically jumped backwards. He felt like he was invading, his space. But everyone in Marin let the guy live his own life. And I've got a story about that. So I'm there the first week or so. We go to Dailies, then we go to the coffee shop across the parking lot. It was called Foodles. And we'd get a cup of coffee or a donut and then go back and start, editing whatever we were doing. So I'm in there and George walks in, jeans, flannel shirt, grabs a pot of coffee, pours it into a styrofoam cup, pays for it, and walks out the door. Okay, this is my first week or so. And I was like, doesn't this guy have somebody to go get him a cup of coffee? I've never seen anything like this. But that was not the thing. I later learned, what the thing was, he wanted to live as best he could a normal life. And that means, and he was able to do that in Marin. People knew who he was, but they would pretty much leave him alone. If a kid came up to him, he'd sign an autograph or something, but the adults sort of knew to let this guy have his own space. And that's a precious commodity when you reach his level.
Wow. I can't imagine that. I feel like I would I would probably be too intimidated to go up to him. I would just be like, watch from afar kind of thing. Do you want to go over this? You were telling us backstage a little bit before we went live about this photo and this day. Do you want to talk about this a little bit?
Okay, so this is first let me explain that Lucasfilm, Skywalker Ranch, Industrial Light and Magic, all at that time were just across the Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco. And we couldn't be at Skywalker Ranch because we were too dirty. We had carpenters, we blew things up, we created smoke and fires, and if you wanted to crash a Star Destroyer somewhere out in the parking lot, we could get away with that because we were in the industrial section of San Rafael. And as a matter of fact, if you looked on a real estate map, it would list our area as light industrial. Well, George came along. He's good with words. He added the word magic, and thus you have industrial magic. That's where it comes from.
Wow. Can you say that one more?
That.
So your name, Industrial Light and Magic, came when you look at a survey, like at a real estate surveillance map.
Yeah, you'll
of
find
that area.
That's what it'll say. It'll say light industrial. That's what it's zoned for. And when ILM used to be in Los Angeles, that's what it was zoned for, light industrial. And so that meant that you could have an auto garage, you could work on your car, you could have carpentry or an upholstery, or you could blow up spaceships.
It's pretty rad, dude.
You can do that at the beautiful Skywalker Ranch with the lakes and the library made out of the finest redwood, and the tech building with a scoring stage large enough to hold a symphony orchestra, with underground parking for everybody, with a rec room where you could buy hamburgers and T-shirts, and there was a racquetball court and a very large swimming pool. I used to go there to lunch all the time, invite friends, but it was
a country club.
Yeah, it was like a private country club. But it was isolated. If you tried to go out for lunch somewhere else, by the time you got to the restaurant, your lunchtime was almost up.
Yeah.
So in certain ways, it wasn't practical. And they asked Mel Brooks, who came out there one time, and he said later, "It's very nice, but I'm never going past San Rafael again." And you know, San Rafael's about 30 miles from it.
Oh man.
So, did I answer your question?
Oh yeah, we were just talking about this photo basically.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so this is the D building screening room. This is the let me get a glass of water here. This is where we looked at all of the dailies from Jedi.
Yeah.
And we had specialized projectors where we could run shots forward, backward, almost stop them. And the supervisors like Dennis Murin, who's in the very front right side of the frame, and George, and I'm sitting directly behind George there, and there's various other camera people. You can see the storyboards up on the walls.
Yeah.
George had a pointer, and he would point out things that needed to be changed. And I remember it was his birthday the week I started there. And one day we're watching the dailies from the bike chase. And these were backgrounds shot in the redwoods in this division with a steady cam up in Humboldt County somewhere. And we're running them, you know, and running them. And all of a sudden, two Ewoks run out and they're holding a banner and it says, "Happy Birthday, George." And everybody has a big laugh. And George keeps saying, "Run that in dailies for Marcia tonight at the house," because he had a screening room at the house. He wanted her to see that because it was kind of funny.
Yeah, that's really cool. Let me ask you a question about the because I think it relates to the stuff that you were working on. So in that picture, if you can bring it back up, Theory, real quick. In the background, like you mentioned, there's a ton of storyboards, and when you think about filmmakers like, for example, Stanley Kubrick, who I used to think was a big storyboarder, it turns out he never storyboarded anything. He just kind of found the shot as he was making the movie. Did you guys pretty much know exactly what every shot would look like? I mean, how close to the final product was the storyboarding process?
Well, in special effects, which were the shots that were being worked on here, you pretty much needed to stick with the plan for the shots. Now, when George got the temps and started cutting them into his live action, he would sometimes figure, okay, I don't need that shot. Well, okay, there, you would just save $200,000 on his movie. So that's why you have these are like plans. George would sit down with a concept artist and they would paint some pretty sophisticated paintings to get across the ideas. But then he would work with someone like Joe Johnston, who was his art director and storyboard artist, and there were a team of people, and they would break down all these shots, all these sequences had to be broken down into specific shots that showed the angle, what was in the shot. There would be a list. If you looked at the bottom of those storyboards, there would be a list: X-wing, Y-wing, you know, Falcon, planet, what, you know, as well as a drawing. And sometimes, like a cartoon strip, there would be a little arrow showing, okay, the camera's going to pan this way or whatever. So that's the plan. Sometimes the plan gets thrown out, but myself, I would receive all these storyboards, and then when George got an idea, needed a new shot, he would send me a new storyboard, and I would get the results from the camera guys who went out and started shooting these new shots. So it's like an architectural drawing, but in almost a shorthand It's a sketch. I've got a bunch of them, and I put a few in my book just to show people, okay, this is concept art. This is planning out the shot. This is what it looked like.
Were there
awesome.
any shots? I mean, obviously, digital editing and VFX have come such a long way since, especially even the 80s. Was there any sort of a scene that George wanted to do that he couldn't do back then? Because I've read in interviews that he couldn't, make the originals as maybe flashy as the prequels because the technology wasn't around. But
Right.
did you know of anything that he wanted to do that just had to be taken out of the script or taken out of the movie because it just couldn't be done at the time?
Well, famously, there were shots in the original Star Wars that the studio would not let him do for cost reasons, and they control everything. And I've said this before. I was in on the restoration of the 3 Star Wars films. Okay, this is how it happened. We're sitting in C Theater, which is the building next to my building at ILM. And this is a beautiful Art Deco theater that George and his wife designed, because it also had a bunch of editing rooms there. And if you've ever been into a studio editing room, they're like a basement and they're horrible. And when he designed his, they have patios, they have beautiful furniture, thick carpets, wonderful. The theater was like that too, just soundproof. The theater floated inside the building. It didn't touch anything because it was originally a sound mixing theater for, Skywalker sound. Okay, so George brings his personal print of Star Wars down and he runs it for us. Now this, when I say his personal print, this is the one of the only prints ever off of the original negative. And he had a copy of it, brought it down, ran it for us, and told us of the changes that he wanted to make. And the idea was that there were some shots, like the famous Jabba the Hutt shot,
right,
that was later done in CG, that just couldn't be done. The technology was not there. He did the best he could. And but when it came time to cut into the original negative, my friend Tom Christopher was the guy who did it. He was the guy who George saw every Friday. No one saw George every Friday. Tom did. And he would update him on where we are with the restoration of Star Wars. And so when they got all done, Tom has the negative laid out there, and he's starting to cut the new shots in, the replacement shots. George hated some of the way the wipes were done. And when they reprinted them, there was a lot of dirt in them. All that needed to be redone. And at one point, Tom says, before we do this, we could just run off a dupe negative in IP, and you'd always have the original version. Right. And George said, basically, stop right there. You don't understand. This, what I'm doing now, this is the original version. This is what I want to do, and they would not let me do. And now I have the money to do it. Okay. Now,
that's so badass.
Some people are very unhappy with changes that were made.
Yeah.
But I'd just like to point out, I don't have a dog in this fight, but I'd just like to point out that every artist, novelist, painter, every kind of artist is constantly adding and making changes to their work. Scott Fitzgerald is one I can think of off the top of my head. And I liken it to this. Let's say you're some kind of big shot financier in the 1950s, and you're in a penthouse in New York, and you have a Picasso, a really nice one. And you have Picasso over to dinner because he's still alive. And he looks at the painting, he says, Bob, I always wanted to add a little green to that, but I never could afford it. would you mind? What are you going to say to the guy? No.
Absolutely. No.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Here, last week, we had the great Paul Hirsch on the show, and he was very generous with his time, and we chatted quite a bit about the editing. And I asked him a question. I'll ask you as well. Famously, when the National Archive was archiving AFI's 100 greatest films, they, Star Wars was one of them, and they asked George for the negative of the film, or a print of the film that had won the Academy Award, so that they can archive. And George sent his restored version. And there was some controversy at the time with the AFI and the National Gallery saying, no, we need the actual one. And he said the same thing you said. No, this is the actual one. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think he should have sent the original based on their guidelines, or do you think he's completely in the right?
Well, I talked to Tom about this once, and he said, there are dupe negatives and things that exist. And if Disney decides they want to put one out, they could do that. And but I can also understand. I've made films, and I would like to be able and go back and change a few things. In fact, I'm doing that now on one. It's sort of a restoration, and I can understand not being the studio stopping you. The studio, when they first saw American Graffiti, they said this is unreleasable, and Francis Coppola stepped in, and he literally pulled out his checkbook and said, I will buy it right now. Well, they backed off, and the rest is history. It was not unreleasable. That film turned out to cost $750,000, and it made $50 million. And that is probably the greatest expense to return ratio in movie history. I don't think anybody will ever beat that one. And it's still, every year it makes, it adds to the 50. So what do I think about it? I'm a kind of a historian guy, and I know what original sources are. And but I also know that if the studio jumps in and they say, okay, we're changing the Star Wars film, if they were to do that now, I think everybody would really legitimately be pissed off. But when the creator does it, I think you got to give them some leeway.
I agree 1,000%.
I agree with that. Yeah. What did you think about them switching Anakin from putting in Hayden in there from the ghosts at the end?
I'm not enough of a Star Wars geek to have an opinion on that. I have a ranch up in above San Francisco. I live near San Francisco.
Yeah.
And a neighbor kid knocked on my door one day, and geez, he had 1,000 questions. He found out that I worked on Star Wars, and you can't say to some kid, beat it, kid. I don't know. But I can't answer all these questions. It was a professional thing for all of us. Yeah. And there was if people came to apply for jobs, and there were too nutso about being fans, we would just pass, because it was fine, but let's see your credentials first and see how you work here. And then we all, have a soft spot in our heart for these movies, because we knew we were working on something that was so important. And who wanted to disappoint every little kid in the world because you didn't do your job right? I mean, you worked. We wanted to do it for George himself because we liked him, and we wanted to do it because we knew these were more than just movies. You had the a whole ethic here.
Yep.
And I have said before, George Lucas made his fortune, his billions, the hard way, selling movie tickets. He never took any public money. Any Tom, Dick, and Harry that's talented enough in Silicon Valley today can become a billionaire. But they're doing it by taking public money. He never did that. And that's pretty hard to do. With the exception of a few very famous writers, the one I can think of is Harry Potter lady. Very few have done what he's done.
Yeah, yeah. Agreed. So to shift gears a little bit here, because you also worked on a trilogy that's probably, one of my Back to the Future is like my favorite movie. It's one of my favorite movies of all time. I think it's a perfect movie. I think it has that rare air of, okay, Back to the Future is a perfect movie. Very specifically, do you remember why they picked Orion, or like any kind of thinking? Did you hear the rumor, the murmurings of why they went DeLorean as the time machine in Back to the Future?
Well, let me say that is one of the most perfect screenplays I think I ever read. I mean, to keep all these balls in the air, the time, future, past, and interlocking the stories, and especially when then you go on, you've got another movie and more stories, and you're going back into the cowboy days, and doing all this stuff. That's just brilliant. And the director had been set. He was originally going to make Cocoon. But he was working on a picture called Romancing the Stone, and that had a terrible preview. The preview was so bad that Richard Zanuck and his wife Lily, they fired him, so he never did Romancing the Stone. But then after he did the first Back to the Future, then he could do anything he wanted.
Right.
And so the one story that I can tell about that is we in the Back to the Future where they go back into the old West, and there's the steam engine and all that stuff. My boss Ken was looking for a place where he could, we had built this, I don't know, 1/6 scale steam engine, and we needed to run it off a trestle and have it crash. And I said, when I was a kid, I used to go squirrel hunting up in this place north of San Rafael, town of Novato, and there was an old quarry up there, a rock quarry. And so Ken rode up there with his wife on a horse one weekend, and he looked at it. He said, Bill said there's something up here, and he found this sort of canyon thing. So ILM went up there, they built that trestle, and they got the steam engine going, and with the DeLorean being pushed, and the DeLorean goes away by special effects magic, and the steam engine goes down into the canyon and explodes. Now, I've seen The General with Buster Keaton, and I've seen a real steam engine go down into a canyon, and they don't explode, surprisingly. But this is the movie business, so we explode everything, any chance we get.
Nice. So you never heard any little story about why they picked the DeLorean specifically? Like, because the DeLorean became this legendary icon after that movie, right? Like before that movie, it was known, but the car was only in production for 3 years. The creator of it was, arrested by the FBI for, later shown as it.
John DeLorean. He was one of the hottest automotive geniuses to come.
Yeah.
I don't know. You'd have to ask the screenwriters. I mean, that was baked in by the time the screen play
By the
got.
time it got to you, what was Zemeckis like to work with?
I worked with him on Roger Rabbit, and I remember we're sitting down at the chem and we were showing him something, some tests we did or something, and I said, you know, what I hope to see is you know that shot in the old cartoons where you've got this guy running or you're on a train and the same telephone pole is going by again and again and again. And he said, oh, we're going to do all that. You know, he was like a big kid. He was very enthusiastic, and he was open to hearing, you know, what some small guy like me had to say. And that was one of the most fun movies to work on because it was so breakthrough. No one had ever done anything like this. I mean, there are examples with lockdown cameras and with a dance routine and singing where animated characters were synced to live action characters. But here, they weren't sure that this could be done. Spielberg had put up some money and he said, I want you guys to do a test to prove that they can animate to this. And so my boss, Ken, said, okay, I'm going to create a test that's so damn hard. We'll just see if those animators can solve it. So we got the car, the famous car, or we did a mock-up of it out on one of the stages. And we had a swinging light. And we had the car headlights that a character is going to walk through. We had Jessica. I mean, you know, we had just stand-ins for this, and then we would shoot it without. And we put all that together and made reductions and sent it to the animators. And they drew first like a pencil test. And before you go into all the color animation, because they were doing, you know, this gorgeous Disney level classic animation, painting cells, hand painting. So you can't do that until you've locked it down. So they did a whole bunch of pencil tests of all the movements and stuff, and we composited over the background. Looked like it was going to work. They sent that out for real now. So we took an 8x10 pegged animation cell of every scene in the live action. And then that's how the movie was eventually done. Every single scene, we had a you know, 8x10 animation cell, and they drew to that over a background that was a still of the live action. And when you composite that all together, so when we put that test together, we sent it down to Spielberg, and he just went nuts. He says, okay, we're going ahead with this. You know, this is a movie about an animated character that no one's ever heard of, you know, the screenwriter. And it cost $50 million to make it. And we screened it in Pasadena. And the first thing that happened is a bunch of young people saw the opening Roger Rabbit cartoon, which is brilliant, in my opinion. They got up and left. They didn't want to see a cartoon. They thought it was going to be a cartoon movie. And then we ran it again for an older group. And one guy stood up and said, I like the movie, but I'd never take my children to see it because of the language. I thought Disney would keel over. The executives would be, you know, comatose. But I'll say something for them. They never changed that language for Baby Herman, which was, you know, slightly rough. But it was a brilliant movie.
With the cigar.
Yeah.
That cigar. And I have a follow-up.
Yeah.
I have a question about theory. I wanted to give you a chance to jump in here if you wanted to ask something. But I do want to ask something following up to the Roger Rabbit stuff.
Go for it, Mark.
So one thing that blows my mind, you had a front row seat to this transition between the traditional special effects methodology as it slowly evolved into what today is now full-blown CGI. And a lot of people, a lot of film historians attribute that to a movie called The Abyss by James Cameron, with the liquid creature was made completely in CGI, you know, as the story is told.
Right.
What was it like working at ILM, is starting to see that slow transition between the traditional special effects evolving into the CGI?
Well, it was exciting and it was scary because it was eventually going to put a lot of people out of work. And we had a guy there who was emptying waste baskets and doing other stuff by the name of John Knoll. John Knoll and his brother invented Photoshop. Now, that's probably the largest selling piece of software besides something from Microsoft that's ever been done. And
they came from ILM?
John Knoll did it on his own at night. And when he got stuck, he would call his brother. And we used to, after John is a major creative person at ILM today. He's a major supervisor there. And because of Photoshop, he's also a very wealthy man. But we used to kid. John was so talented. He did that water creature. And he would go home at night and bring stuff back in the next day and say, you know, well, I was fooling around, and he would show something that would just knock your socks off. And we used to kid, and we'd say, you know, John has an older, smarter brother. And we live in Michigan, and John calls him when he gets stuck on something. Well, John was instrumental in getting some of this stuff going. Also, George was pushing very hard. Hollywood, they don't want to spend any money. They don't want any R&D. They don't want this. They don't want that. George had to drag them kicking and screaming into electronic editing with the Editroid. They had to drag him into the digital projection, digital cameras. He hooked up with Sony because his company was not large enough to you know, build a digital motion picture camera. So the breakthroughs that this guy, you know, we haven't even got to Pixar yet. You know, when the first time when John Lasseter brought over a little video, he called me and said, you know, can we bring this over and show it, because we finished it and we scanned it out. Well, that was Luxo Jr. Well, Luxo Jr., I looked at the thing and I said, anybody who can get that much emotion out of a Luxo lamp is pretty damn talented. And I have no idea where he's going in the world, but straight up, I think. And of course, the whole Pixar thing came right out of ILM's computer division and the scanning of negatives. It to begin with, to make some of these shots like you're talking about in The Abyss, we would take the film negative background, we would scan it into digital ones and zeros that you could put in a computer, and then once you get it in the computer, you can do any damn thing you want to it. It's like magic. And then you scan it back out. It goes back to film, but you can cut it into your movie. Like today, as I've mentioned, it would be nothing to do the girl in the little red dress in Schindler's List, but was a big deal back then. So all of this stuff, to me, means that if you compare George Lucas with someone who's gotten a lot more fame, like Steve Jobs, I think in the end, George is going to be found to be the more important person, because he changed all of filmmaking for all time. Yeah. And there was pushback when he tried to do the restorations. All the executives were totally against doing that. They did not. They said, we're not in the restoration business. And they tried to stop him. They did everything they could. But of course, he owned the company, and they could only go so far. And then, if you look at the money they made off those restorations, they made $250 million. And that financed
Holy crap.
the new movies that they wanted to make.
Jesus.
You know,
Unbelievable.
The prequels, yeah.
What are they thinking? Sometimes those executives would come in and they would run some film. They were going to do like go to a Star Wars convention or something. They'd bring this film and they run it for George for his approval. And I remember I was sitting there one day and George says, you know, he didn't like it.
Yeah.
And they talked him into it. And finally he just said, all right, go with it. I thought to myself, you know, there's a lot of things I may have some disagreements with George on, but if it's a film subject and he's telling you it's not working, you better listen.
Yeah.
It's amazing. You know what? When you say this, actually gets me a little bit angry. Okay. And
I'm angry. Yeah, I'm angry hearing that because I'm tired of
and
these
I apologize for saying this, but like, you're so right. You know, you have the guy who literally transcended and changed film in more different layers than any other filmmaker, you know, ever, right? It's like you'd have to go all the way back to maybe Orson Welles and Alfred Hitchcock to even try to create a comparable, and I don't think you can. And this man was kind of discarded off to the side in this new acquisition by Disney. If you were to hear, and I look, the sources that I'm getting this from are his interview that he gave PBS with that gentleman. I forget his name right now, but you know, from his own words, he felt discarded. You know, after Disney bought this franchise off of him and no longer took his advice. And to your point, if George Lucas says X, Y, Z making, you better damn well listen to it. You know, even the prequels changed cinema, right? Like every single movie changed cinema. Like, you know, yeah. Anyway, it just gets me a little frustrated. I'm sorry.
Did he ever? I mean, I know he owned the company and all that, so he kind of pretty much had free reign. But was there anything that they told him to change about any of the originals? That
no, they wouldn't intervene in that. They would intervene in things that they thought were business oriented. They were really focused on getting the prequels made because that was going to be
money,
big money, big money. I mean, they took all the sponsors out to the ranch and they ran what in effect were little sales films about what they could expect these new films to do, and it was just a landslide of money coming in, and they're all set on that, and that's why they said, you know, we got to distract George from doing these restorations because that's not where the business is. And I swear there was one time after Howard the Duck when if he hadn't owned the company, something similar to what happened to Steve Jobs would have probably happened. In other words, there would have been some kind of move to bump him up to chairman and let somebody else run the joint. And, you know, that's just speculation on my part, but it's different when you own the company. Then you don't really have those problems. And, you know, the things that you've alluded to before about his unhappiness with some of the things that Disney has done, he sold them his screenplays and they weren't interested in them. And I think that the idea of selling the film to Disney, I think that was a brilliant idea in the sense of legacy because his kids aren't interested in it. And if you want it to survive off into the future, that's the way to have it stay alive. Because imagine what would happen if just he passed away and all this stuff is sitting out at the ranch and in boxes and
Right.
so what's gonna
I don't think that would have happened. I don't know. I just feel like that would never have. I feel like there would have been someone that would have been. I don't know. I feel like he would have appointed Dave Filoni or something, as head of. I don't know. Maybe he would have come in there and handled everything from there on, and Dave Filoni would give it to someone when he got very old and was done with it. And, I don't know. I just don't feel like it would have gone the way that it did. I read Bob Iger's book, and I gotta say, I wasn't really interested with. I wasn't in favor of the way that he kind of pitched the idea of buying Lucasfilm from George. I mean, he closed the Disneyland park, brought George in for lunch or whatever, and I was like, you don't have any heirs. You're kind of getting old. I mean, this is the gist of what he was saying, and
right.
I didn't enjoy that. I mean, it was almost felt like Palpatine was coercing Anakin, like talking to Anakin at this point, and it was just kind of strange to me. And it seems like because Bob, did a few favors for George with the Indiana Jones show in the 90s or in the late 80s, that George kind of felt, maybe indebted to him.
Well, George always had an affinity for Disneyland and Disney. Yeah. And, at one time, there was an idea that, well, there could be a Lucasland kind of thing. We used to joke about it. But George knew that the company that was best suited to do the rides and all those things, like I worked on Star Tours, that famous
it's a great
ride. Yeah, it was
it's awesome.
Well written, cool idea.
Yeah.
But he knew that that was the group to do it. And that was the place to do it, because the infrastructure that Disney had built up over decades. And so I think that's why he went with them. He always admired their ability.
Yeah.
But when you wake up one day and now you've gone from master of the universe to they don't want to listen to you, and they don't have to. That's hard for anybody, but that happens to a lot of artists. And thank God he walked away, more than solvent. He's building a fabulous museum in Los Angeles that looks like a spaceship.
Yeah,
I wrote a little article about it and had some pictures of it. It's on my Facebook page if you get to it, and it's on my Inside Star Wars Facebook page.
Do you want to shout that out for everyone watching where they can find it?
So if you want to go to Facebook/Inside the Star Wars Empire, you will see a Facebook page, and it has things that I post occasionally. The latest thing that I posted was photos of the museum. It gives the architect's name, and it shows various first the concept drawing of it, which George and his wife just fell in love with, but then it shows all of the where the construction is right now, the photos. And there's a section there, it's an aerial that was shot from a web or a drone, and it looks like the ship of an aircraft carrier is what it looks like right now, which is so appropriate for a Star Wars museum to look like this giant hospital ship or something floating in Los Angeles. It's 4 stories high. It's 270,000 square feet. And one of the bonuses for George was, and he got very excited, there's a lot of schools near it. So he wants school kids to be introduced to narrative art, which means comic books. It means illustrations. I mean, Norman Rockwell, master artist, the art world has abandoned him. But you look at some of those and see what he did. I mean, pretty hard to deny it when it's right in front of you, and you're a little kid and you're wandering around, you're seeing all this stuff, and maybe you're going to see some Star Wars spaceships, and you're going to see drawings, original drawings, and then you're going to, it's going to blend into all kinds of ways of storytelling through narrative, art, and illustration.
You mentioned something that just breaks my heart every time. So I have to just follow up on it very quickly. That George gave them these sequel screenplays and they discarded them. Do you have any insight into what the sequel story be about, or what some of George's visions were for the movies past, for 7, 8, 9?
I don't. I would guess that they're somewhat akin to the prequels. One thing I can say, which I put this in my book, and I said, you heard it here first, folks. George was in the screening room one day, and he mentioned he was going to do a comedy version of Star Wars. This was just something he just happened to mention, that he thought that would be a cool thing to do someday. And, we all remember back when there was a thing called Hardware Wars. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it was a kid made a film, a local filmmaker, using pots and pans and stuff, and irons, ironing board irons, flying through a simulated space. And it was, it was just kind of a funny little takeoff. And I don't know I know that George laughed at that and thought it was kind of funny. And so where this idea came from, or why it disappeared, I have no idea. Maybe it was just that day.
Gotcha. Fair enough. My greatest unfulfilled fantasy is to know what his actual story was for 7, 8, 9. I mean, there's rumors, Theory just did a video on it recently, but there was an actual script. There was an actual script written.
I think there was 3.
Yeah. And Michael Arndt, who's a brilliant writer, doesn't want to talk about it. He just, doesn't want to talk about it. And, it's kind of heartbreaking that story lost in the Ark of the Covenant. Like if they open up the Ark, like people start melting or something. Like, it's like, I don't know. It just breaks my heart.
Well, have you ever seen the original screenplay for Star Wars? I mean, you have to see the original thing, scratched out by George. You have to go to the UCLA film library and find someone who can lead you to the script. My wife for a while was doing script writing, and she read it, and the thing is way too long for one movie. I mean, it is a screenplay usually is like 120 pages, and this is, I don't remember, I think over 300 pages.
Yeah,
so that sort of had to be corralled down. But to me, it was no surprise that when the roof blew off and this thing became the biggest thing since Copper Pipe, the movie, that he said, well, you know what? I've got some other ideas here. And so when they shot Empire, which I think is the best of the films. I mean, given that Star Wars is great, but just to my taste, I really liked Empire.
Yep.
And so when they're shooting a movie, whether it's Jedi or any of the Star Wars, they have cover names, because you can't, people come by and they always ask, well, what movie is it? What are you going to say? Star Wars? You can't say that.
Yeah.
So for Empire, it was Blue Harvest. Everybody got T-shirts that said Blue Harvest, and there were little signs on the trucks that said Blue Harvest. The one I can't remember is what the one was for Jedi. but I'm gonna look into that and see if
Blue Harvest is that's what they called the Family Guy spoof, the Family Guy Star Wars comedy.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
George apparently was a fan of. Yeah.
Well, it's like there are certain things in movie dumb where if a screenwriter, for instance, wants his name taken off the movie, or a director, there are certain sort of classic names that they were just industry standards, so everybody would know. You know, that's not who wrote it, that's not who directed it.
Right.
I can't remember off the top of my head now, but
when it came down to your editing process, what were the main things that you looked for? What were the main things that George looked for? Because I know he was not just a director or writer, but he also enjoyed being in the editing room or editing movies.
Like I've said before, he's one of the few directors who could actually sit down and shoot and edit his own movie. I think also Marcia Lucas has not been given her fair due for what I mean, here's a woman that she cut Taxi Driver. Her role as an editor, and she is the one that looked at Raiders when Steven screened it for his friends, George and his fellow directors, and she said, Steven, there's no dramatic conclusion to the story because we never see what happened to the girl. And all of a sudden Steven realized, yeah, she's right, and went out and shot the ending, which they shot on the steps to the San Francisco City Hall. To have someone who can not only say that there is a problem with your movie, but then tell you how to fix it, that's golden. And Marcia could do that. I remember talking to one of the assistant editors, and he said she was working on this scene, and there was a fallen redwood, and there was an Ewok, and there was Leah, I guess, and it was scraps. There was nothing there. When she got through with it, tears were going to be in some viewers' eyes.
Right.
Get through with that scene, and so we were all very sad when she left the marriage, left their combined genius in making movies. So I just want to always give a little shout out to her.
Yeah, for sure. Marcia Lucas, Academy Award winner and legendary filmmaker.
She came in on Jedi. I think she put in 2 weeks on it, and just went through it and fixed stuff up. I don't know exactly what she did, but it was better when she got done with it.
Yeah,
Magic.
That's awesome. I want to be conscious. Go ahead, Thierry.
Yeah, no, I was going to say I want to be respectful of your time, and we love talking to you, but
we've been going for 1 hour.
Yeah, we've been going over your time now.
Yeah, and look, I just want to remind everybody about the book. You want to bring the book back up?
Absolutely.
Inside the Star Wars Empire, a memoir by Kimberlin. I think we probably touched this of all the cool stories that you could probably find in here. So go out there and support this book.
Yeah, the link is in the description. You guys can find it on Amazon in every format. And
there it is. Look at that.
As Bill said, you can walk into
it. I wanted to do that.
Yeah. There it is.
And there it is. I fought like hell to get that cover, and there it is. It's full of the same kind of stories that I've been saying today, and on a lot of different movies. It's a memoir of a guy who worked in the movie business for 30 plus years.
And you worked at ILM for 20 something years.
20 years for ILM. I ran the department for almost a decade, and I had a lot of experiences and things, and I didn't like when we would leave Dailies. Editorial had a bulletin board outside in the hallway, and George and everybody would gather, see what was on. We called it the free speech board, and people would just put stuff.
Hi, first of all, that's awesome.
So I remember one day somebody put up something that was a picture of what Muhammad Ali might look like when he was in his 70s. And of course, at that time, he was like 35 or something. And then another article was there that speculated that in the future, a house could cost as much as $200,000. And we thought that was so crazy. How could anybody afford a house that cost $200,000? Well, look at where we are now.
I wish it cost $200,000.
Right.
Look, first of all, I can't say how relevant and how important it is, and what a great culture it seemed that ILM was, where you have a board called the Free Speech Board where people can feel confident to.
Yeah.
And George can come by and look at it.
Yeah.
And he's laughing about it. So
that's the kind of healthy thing that we just don't, some people literally see free speech as a problem, and it's beautiful, to know that that company that means so much to me, and shaped me so much, had those kind of, that kind of DNA in it. Before we go, I do want to point out a few things. Okay. We've been, it feels like it's my full-time job, but we've been working really hard on StarWarsTheory.com. So go check that out, StarWarsTheory.com. There's been a bunch of new updates, and even some more new updates are coming tomorrow. So if you're already a member of StarWarsTheory.com, thank you. If you're not, go check it out. Blockchain bulletin board system that actually rewards the creators of the posts financially, right? We're trying to create blockchain-based technologies that actually benefit the audience, Bill. So something I'm very, very excited about. If you want to go check it out, StarWarsTheory.com.
There's a big forum on there. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's very active. And also, we're clipping out these interviews, and we'll clip out Bill's as well. We're just starting to clip out Paul Hirsch's. If you go to youtube.com /Revog, I don't know if you can bring that up really quick, Theory. It's all good. So after we do the interview, we do little clip outs, and grab the little tidbits, so we can socialize those.
Like promos.
Yeah. Just the little hot topics, But anyway, it's all good if you can't bring it up, but go check that out. Oh, there it is. Yeah, you see there we have clips coming on from Alan Dean Foster and Paul Hirsch. So go check that out. And,
the highlights.
The highlights, baby. And we do have another show, another Rule of Two with another legendary Star Wars guest coming up next week. We're not going to say who it is yet or give the time, because these things are very fluid, but we will make that announcement soon. But Bill, I want to be able to chat with you again. I don't feel like we touched on everything, and there seems like there's so much wisdom that you can impart to us.
And we can find grateful. A lot of that in his book. So make sure you check it out. It's linked below, and you can also walk into any bookstore and you can find it there too. So Bill, thank you so much for your time. You made a lot of my favorite movies. You worked on a lot of my favorite movies. And my first job that I ever wanted was to work at ILM and to make lightsabers when I was 6 years old. So,
do you have a lightsaber from ILM? Do you have anything near you that you can just flash us and give us?
He's got that C-3PO I see over there.
If you look at the photos, I pulled stuff down off the wall and out of garbage cans that I didn't want to see go away. And so I've got some there. If you get a hold of my book, there's some photos in there of stuff that I salvaged, and that's my effort to make this period a little bit better in history. The book, no one that ever worked for ILM or Lucasfilm has ever written a book. Now, I know Paul Hirsch wrote a wonderful book, but he wasn't an employee.
Mhm.
I'm the only employee who's ever done it. I don't know if they're afraid of the lawyers or what. But, and I think it's going to be some time. The books are all by journalists who've come in, spent a couple of weeks, interviewed people,
Yeah.
wrote a book, and they're gone. I was there. I saw it. I'm an original source. I wrote it down. I'm sure there's mistakes in there, or people may not like my opinion about this, that, or the other thing. But it is there for history.
Welcome to 2021 if people don't like your opinion.
One last question for you, Bill. If you had to give advice to young folks out there who want to take a path in the filmmaking world, in the creative world, after all this wonderful experience that you've gained in your career, what would your advice for young people be that want to pursue this as a career?
Get yourself an internship. We had hundreds of interns at Lucasfilm, at ILM, very bright students. And the thing about them is we became sort of old war horses, and their enthusiasm just was infectious for us. So they learned some like real world things, and we got this boost. When you've heard the term, many Bothans died to bring you this message, or whatever it is. When you heard that 500 times, you don't want to hear it anymore, and you start making fun of it. And we would say, we would bring a hamburger over to someone, and we'd say, many Bothans died to bring you this hamburger. So interns, get an internship, and I guarantee you, if you want to work in Hollywood, you can work in Hollywood. You may not like it when you get there. I suggest intern. And people should not say, oh, I have this goal or I have that goal. In my opinion, you should find the lifestyle where you're happy, and then go out and figure out a way to make a living to let you live that lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, many Bothans died bringing you this podcast. So,
okay.
Thank you.
Thank
you very much, sir.
And you guys can check out the book once again. See everybody.